Our recording. Axton will get us started.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming. I do want to say before we get started, when Sarah and I came up with this idea of conducting a webinar on hoarding, we were hoping to capture interest from folks in Minnesota and South Dakota. So it is great that it has spread throughout the nation and even internationally. So welcome everyone. We are glad you're here. The focus of today's session really is more informational than anything else. And with that said, based on some of the comments that we've received with the registration form and in email, we have folks attending the webinar today that are in all sorts of different places, so to speak, with regard to hoarding. So we have some, of course, as you see in the chat, who work with those who suffer from hoarding in a professional capacity. There are also concerned family members that are in attendance today, as well as those who are suffering from hoarding and looking for additional resources. So we ask that any comments that are in the chat are respectful in nature, and just be aware that there are folks here that are in a variety of places with respect to this issue. So I'm Axton Betts Hamilton, and I'm an assistant professor of consumer affairs at South Dakota State University. My primary research area is financial abuse within families, so looking at elder financial exploitation by family members, as well as identity theft perpetrated by family members. That's something, or actually both things have happened in my family, and that's what spurred my interest in conducting research in those areas. I also do some work in housing, and I'm involved in a project that's looking at factors that influence home modifications for those who want to age in place. So while housing is not necessarily my primary research focus, it is an area of interest of mine. And with that, I'll have Sarah introduce herself.
Thank you, Axton. I just put on my headset here, so I'm hoping you can hear me. Sarah Crymans, I'm an extension educator with the University of Minnesota Extension based out of our Morris Regional Office. And I recognize some names, so welcome back for those who have participated in previous webinars. Welcome to those of you that are new to our webinars, but I'm hoping we'll have great conversation today. We've pulled together some really good basic information on hoarding and resources, and so we're hopeful this will be helpful for folks. Axton.
Okay, so our learning objectives for today is that we hope by the end of the webinar, you'll be able to list the connections between health, well-being, and the home environment. By the end of today's webinar, we hope you'll be able to identify how compulsive hoarding impacts one's financial, emotional, and physical well-being. And then we also hope that you'll be able to list strategies and resources to address hoarding. So on this slide, we have a picture of what is known in the housing literature as a single-family detached dwelling. And the reason we included this slide is just to stress the point that the information and strategies and resources that we share with you today are applicable to any housing situation. So you don't have to live in a single family detached dwelling for the information and resources that we share with you to work for you. So what we're going to share with you today is applicable if you live in an apartment, if you live in a townhome, if you live in a mobile home, if you live in an assisted living community, senior apartments, that type of situation. So what we share today can be implemented regardless of the type of home that you live in. This next resource here, and I should have said at the beginning, this series of webinars, this is a third webinar in a series of three that have focused on healthy housing. And some of you have attended all three, so thank you for that. And it is sponsored by the National Healthy Homes Partnership. So the resources that the first 50 participants are receiving for each of these webinars are paid for by the National Healthy Homes Partnership. And the National Healthy Homes Partnership produced this booklet. So it's available online. It's called Everyone Deserves a Safe and Healthy Home. And it is a booklet that addresses all different types of issues related to having a safe and healthy home. So I encourage you to check that out.
And Axton, I will share up front here, we will be sending a follow-up email with a PDF of the PowerPoint slides and links to any links that we talk about. So you'll be getting an email with those. So we may throw some of those in the chat right now, but no, you'll be getting those in an email.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that, Sarah. So the 8 principles of healthy homes, the first is to keep it dry. The second is to keep it clean. The third is to keep it safe. The fourth is to keep it well ventilated. The fifth is to keep it pest-free. The sixth is to keep it contaminant-free. The seventh is to keep it well maintained. And the eighth is to keep it thermally controlled. For an individual who suffers from compulsive hoarding, the hoarding behaviors can make it difficult to keep the home dry, clean, safe, well ventilated, pest-free, well maintained, etc. So compulsive hoarding, while it's definitely an emotional issue, and we'll get into more of that later in the presentation, it's also very much a healthy homes issue. So a healthy home, the official definition, is one that is designed, constructed, maintained, or rehabilitated in a manner that prevents diseases and injuries that result from housing-related hazards. So now I would like you all to open the chat and give us your thoughts on what is the difference between a collector and a hoarder. So just type whatever thoughts you have about what differentiates a collector and a hoarder. A collector will take care of their things. Compulsion. So I saw a lot of comments come in all at once. Do you control the object, or does the object control you? A collector is able to enjoy their belongings. Hoarders have no control over what they collect. A collector has a purpose for the item. Collector is intentional. Collector knows the value of the object and what they have. Collector is intentional and cares for things. Hoarding, compulsive with emotional attachment. Hoarders are meeting psychological needs. Collectors are always aware of what they have. With collectors, it doesn't affect their quality of life. Hoarding is a mental illness. Okay, well, the comments have slowed down, so I'll go ahead and switch to the next slide. And collecting is when an individual deliberately searches out specific items. They then categorize them and carefully display their collections. When I think of collecting, for those of you who are familiar with the 4-H program, I grew up in Indiana, and Indiana 4-H had a collections project. And I remember the collections project, children who would be involved in that maybe would, bring and display their collection of Beanie Babies. That tells you how old I am. Or they would display their, Ertl tractor toys that they collected, but they deliberately searched out specific items, they categorized them, and then they carefully displayed them. So they were very neat, very clean, very organized. Compulsive hoarding or hoarding disorder is a persistent difficulty with discarding or parting with possessions because of a perceived need to save them. So a little bit of a difference here. It's still about collecting and compulsive hoarding or hoarding disorder. It's still about stuff, still about having things, but the motivation behind each is different. So people with hoarding disorder may also experience other mental health disorders, such as depression, anxiety disorders, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, otherwise known as ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So obsessive compulsive disorder and obsessive compulsive personality disorder sound really similar, and you might think that the personality disorder is just OCD, but more, and maybe more difficulty. But the DSM-5, so the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders that clinicians use to help diagnose clients, distinguishes obsessive compulsive disorder from obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So obsessive compulsive disorder is generally characterized by intrusive thoughts and anxiety, and those behaviors can manifest by, say, checking to make sure your stove is off repeatedly, but that checking doesn't really alleviate the anxiety, or it might be compulsively washing one's hands because they're afraid of picking up germs, but they don't enjoy the activity. Obsessive compulsive personality disorder is characterized by rigid and perfectionistic behaviors, and embedded within that with regard to finances. And I'm pulling from the financial therapy literature with this, and we'll get into financial therapy a little bit later. They have a miserly spending style because, again, rigid, perfectionistic. They want to make sure that they are spending money on the thing that they need, that it's the best choice of all the available choices. And they tend to view money as something to be hoarded for future catastrophes. So this next slide is a hoarding disorder questionnaire developed by Clance, Kaler, and Clance, and they are co-authors of a financial therapy book that we'll share near the end of the presentation that has a lot of practitioner friendly resources. It's also, I think, a nice read for those who are not practitioners but are interested in the intersection of emotions and finances. And they developed this hoarding disorder questionnaire, and you answer each of these questions, yes, no. The more yeses that you answer, the more likely it is that you have hoarding disorder. So I'll just go through a few of these and won't read them all to you. But the first is, are you unable to throw things away, even if they are only of limited value? Is your living space cluttered with items that you do not use on a regular basis? And then, does throwing something away make you feel like you are losing a part of yourself? And do possessions provide you with feelings of safety or security? So again, yes, no responses. And again, the more yeses that you answer on this questionnaire, the more likely it is that you have challenges with hoarding. So I will transfer things over to Sarah.
Great. Thanks for that transition so I could unmute myself. So the questionnaire that Axton just went through really addresses the signs and symptoms, but we're going to run through these as well. So does the person excessively acquire items that are needed and there's no space for them? Are they do they have a persistent difficulty throwing out or parting with items, regardless of the value, right? It could be something that monetarily is really valuable, or it could be, a flyer that they got in the mail 5 years ago. Do they have a feeling, or do they have a feeling, a need to save items, and again are upset by the thought of discarding those? Also, building up of clutter to the point where rooms become unusable. We're not able to cook in the kitchen. We're not able to sleep on the bed. We're not able to sit at the dining room table, those sorts of things. And is there a tendency towards indecisiveness, perfectionism, avoidance, procrastination, and problems with planning and organizing? So really the first symptom probably is that getting and saving those excessive number of items and that gradual buildup over time. And this could often surface when someone is a teenager to the early adult years. And as the person grows older, they typically start acquiring things that have no immediate need, or again, there's no space available. By middle age, symptoms could be severe and may be harder to treat. Problems with hoarding gradually develop over time and tend to be a private behavior, right? We may not let people in our homes. The hoarding isn't obvious when we're outside of the home. But often significant clutter is developed by the time it gains attention from other people. Relationships are often impacted by hoarding. So people who hoard have very few meaningful relationships, but those relationships that they do have, they've had for a long time. So excessive acquiring and refusing to discard items results in a variety of things. Things that I guess would be obvious. There's going to be disorganized piles and stacks of items. It might be newspapers, clothes, paperwork, books, or sentimental items. Possessions that crowd and clutter walking spaces and living areas, making, again, space unusable for the intended purpose. And I think back to those, the healthy homes, the list of 8 things that Axton shared, and I'm seeing a lot of safety issues with this. There could be a buildup of food or trash to unusually excessive and unsanitary levels. Again, that's where pests and different things might come in. There could be significant distress or problems functioning or keeping oneself and others safe in the home. And there could be conflict with others who are trying to reduce or remove the clutter, and definitely difficulty organizing items and sometimes losing important items in the clutter. So this isn't the I lost my car keys, they're somewhere in the house type thing. It's like we may never find those because they've been buried in the clutter. So we want to ask this question, and we invite folks to share in the chat again. Why do you think people with a hoarding disorder save items? Why do we think that? Trauma responses brings them a sense of comfort, fear that they won't have anything in the future, okay, to fill a void, historical trauma, to have a sense of security. Oh, the feeling that I might need that, might need it someday. Oh, we don't want it to go to waste, right? Definitely. Oh, divorce. Yep, that could be emotional barriers, more attached to the emotions or memories than to the value or utility. On the registration, and I was going to try to find my registration list here again, someone referred to hoarding as kind of a depression era sort of connection, right? There was such scarcity, and so they've gone to the other end of hoarding and keeping things because they're worried about that scarcity again. Makes you feel good. All right, lots of good response. Fear, insecurity, panic. Yep. wonderful responses. So we have a short video, and I just realized that I did not share my sound. So I'm going to do that quickly, and we're going to hopefully have this video work for us. Exton, can you hear that?
No.
No. Okay, I'm going to stop. We'll try one more time here. Whoops, let me stop her a minute.
You also have it muted on the screen there.
Oh, well, that's probably what it was. We're going to move this back here.
So all of us
You're good.
enjoy having objects. They bring meaning and joy to our life. Individuals with hoarding disorder are no different from all of us. We have three main reasons that we keep objects. So one is sentimentality, something that reminds you of a happy time or a loved one. The second is the aesthetics. Walking along the beach and seeing a beautiful seashell, you want to take it home and remember the beauty of the day and the object. And the other is the usefulness. So I don't want to throw this away. It could come in handy someday. Now, individuals with hoarding disorder have these same reasons, but they're magnified. So objects may have all three of these reasons, or the feelings may be more intense. And that's really where the attachment comes in and the difficulty parting with objects. Individuals with hoarding disorder are very creative, and they can come up with lots of uses for a particular object. And we've had clients where something as simple as a toilet paper roll, they could use it for binoculars for a child's science fair project. It could be donated to a local school. An art project could be made out of it. However, one of the differences that distinguishes an artist versus somebody with hoarding disorder is that those ideas are not fulfilled and realized. So when you ask somebody with hoarding disorder, they don't have plans to donate it to a school. They don't have plans to make an object. They may have plans, but they don't actually execute on that. One of the things I would say about hoarding disorder is that it stems from some characteristics deep within us as human beings that are actually positive. So wanting to be conserving resources, and throughout the evolution of man, it's been important in times of relatively few resources to gather resources, and it's been very adaptive. But as time has gone by with industrial revolution and also a lot of advertising, we get more and more pressure that taps into that fundamental need to save and conserve resources. So all of us.
All right, and we're going to go to the next slide. There we go. Well, that video is from the International OCD Foundation, and so we just really liked the way she described how what hoarders are thinking as they're collecting items. So items are, as she shared, items are typically saved because they believe items are unique, or they may be used at some point in the future. They may have some emotional significance, perhaps serving as a reminder of happier times, or representing loved people or beloved pets from the past. They may feel safer when they're surrounded by the things they save. And again, they just don't want to waste anything. So causes, it's really not clear what causes hoarding disorder. Might be part genetics, brain functioning, stressful life events, or the trauma that several people referred to in the chat box. Those are all being studied as possible causes for hoarding. So what do you think are the risk factors of hoarding? Go ahead and share in the chat. What do you see as some risk factors? And thank you, Sophia, for sharing Dr. Rodriguez's name. Relationships, trauma, going broke, dangerous, emergency, social isolation. Definitely living. Oh, these are going so fast. Loss of relationships, eviction, mold, going back to that, healthy homes, falling, Yes, definitely falls. Um, Yep, safety in the home, isolation, losing items, emergency services are hindered. I mean, I went back and caught Susan's comment there too, right? So if there's a need to call the fire department or the ambulance, they would have difficulty navigating in the home. Definitely. Loss of visitors, right? So that social isolation, death, limiting life joy. Interesting, Jennifer. Thanks for sharing that. House fires, egress. Can you get out the windows if you need to? Can you make it to the doors? Physical and mental health conditions may decline. Yeah. Excellent. Excellent. I am going to pass it back to Axton.
All right, so great responses to that question. So we're going to elaborate more on these specific risk factors for compulsive hoarding. Now, if you have one or more of these, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to suffer from compulsive hoarding at some point. But if you have several, it's just something to be aware of. So age, Sarah talked about this a bit earlier. Hoarding generally starts earlier in life in the teenage years and gets worse with age. And as a person gets older and has these behaviors, it's more difficult to address as the person ages. Personality, individuals who have, I guess for lack of a better way to say it, indecisive personalities, they have trouble making decisions. They want to make sure they make the right decision because, they're afraid if they don't, something negative is going to happen. That can be a risk factor. I talked about perfectionism earlier. That can be a risk factor. Family history. There has been a demonstrated link between having a family member who suffers from compulsive hoarding and then developing it yourself later in life. Stressful life events. And what's interesting here is that these stressful life events that can precipitate compulsive hoarding, as many of you have noted, can be reflective of trauma, and they're associated with loss, such as divorce. And that was mentioned in the chat earlier. Eviction. So when you're evicted and you lose your possessions, you lose your home, and then losing your possessions in a fire. And so those stressful life events where there's been loss, psychologically, we're wired to avoid loss. Loss is painful. And so hoarding can be a coping mechanism to cope with that trauma to help ensure that there's no loss of possessions in the future. Social isolation, as many of you mentioned, is a risk factor. And financial anxiety can be a risk factor as well, because if you have anxiety about your financial situation, it could compel you to save items that could be useful someday. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, if I save it now, I won't have to go out and buy it later. And so you'll have it and you'll be able to save money.
Axton, I have to share, as I was looking for some photos for the PowerPoint and I was Googling hoarding photos, there were several that came up with toilet paper in relation to COVID, right? There are certain things that maybe all of us were hoarding as a result of what was happening across the world too. So I've just found that really interesting. I was like, oh, I was a hoarder on certain items as well.
Well, Ed, I just saw a comment in the chat about learning from, Depression era family members. And I do have to say that reminds me of a story of my own family. My grandfather was born in 1910, and he was in college when the Depression happened. And because he experienced life when he had things, he lived through the Roaring '20s. Life was good. He had a athletic scholarship to college, and then the Depression happened. So he had that loss, and he was in his 70s when I was born, and I can remember standing next to him at the sink, and he's washing dishes, and he would wash used aluminum foil. And I say, Grandpa, what are you washing aluminum foil for? Just throw it away and rip off, new sheet from the roll. And I remember him telling me that I hope someday you never have to experience the losses that I have. Now, my other grandfather was born in 1930, so he was born during the Depression. So he was born during that era of extreme deprivation, and he didn't experience the same kind of loss. He didn't have it and then he lost it. He started out not having it and then gained it. So he didn't behave that way at all. So it's interesting, the timing of when the Depression occurred and the effect that it had on each of my grandfathers. So complications that can arise from compulsive hoarding are, and several of you have mentioned this in the chat, increased risk of falls, injury or being trapped by shifting or falling items, family conflicts, loneliness and social isolation, unsanitary conditions that pose a risk to health. I do want to pause here and point out that not all hoarding is necessarily unsanitary. And an example I have of this is when I was in graduate school, I had an upstairs neighbor, and she was elderly, and she very clearly suffered from compulsive hoarding, but everything was very clean. She spent a lot of time keeping the items that she had organized, very clean, but to get through her apartment, there were trails because there was so much stuff, but it was clean. There was definitely not any issues with hygiene or unsanitary conditions in her situation. So again, not all hoarding is unsanitary in nature. Interferes with daily tasks such as bathing or cooking because maybe you can't get to the stove because you have items that you saved in the way. It can be a fire hazard, which we've discussed. Speaking of the same neighbor that lived above me when I was in graduate school, she kept everything very clean, very organized, very neat, but she had a lot of stuff. And one of the things that she liked to do was decorate for every holiday. And she would decorate her door and, decorate the walls around her front door, and the decorations kind of kept spilling out into the common hallway. And our property manager was really upset with her and said, "You can't have these things out here. It's a matter of safety. It affects, the ability of the fire department to come in here if there was ever a fire." And she was really upset over that. Us as neighbors, and it was a sixplex, so we were all pretty friendly with each other, and we felt like this is while it's clean, this is just overflow from her apartment. And she got in trouble with our property manager, and again, it affected that emotion she had around those items that, hey, this is my stuff, I'm taking care of it, I'm doing something good for the apartment community, and you're telling me I can't have it out here because of these egress rules and whatnot. So interesting situation there. Of course, an unfortunate situation as well. Poor work performance, and I'll get into that, I believe, on the next slide. Legal issues such as eviction and financial stress. So if you're purchasing items because you are suffering from hoarding, that can keep you from being able to meet other living expenses. You might accumulate so many things that you purchase a storage unit that you may or may not be able to afford. So, impact on work. Individuals who suffer from compulsive hoarding have, or can have, I should say, a poor sense of time. They often misplace files. They're tardy or absent frequently, and that might be, maybe they can't find their car keys. Maybe they've put them down somewhere and they can't find them because maybe something has fallen on top of the car keys. It could be, a whole host of reasons. Difficulty with making decisions, again, going back to that indecisiveness personality trait and that perfectionism. You want to make sure that you make the absolute right decision. They may miss important deadlines, again, because they might be perfectionistic with their work. And reduce productivity because they want to make it perfect. They would rather not meet a deadline with something that's imperfect, but yet still meets the criteria than, not have it be perfect. And then hoarding animals. So this behavior, while it's often stigmatized, it does come from a good place. It comes from a place of wanting to help animals. And individuals may collect dozens or even hundreds of pets. They may be strays. I've seen this before with cats, where someone takes in a stray cat and the cat has kittens and they can't afford to get the cat spayed, and then it has more kittens, and those kittens have kittens, and then before long it's a hoarding situation. So the animals may be inside or outside, but the animals often aren't cared for properly, in part because there's so many of them. And the health and safety of the person and animals are at risk. Hoarding animals, especially inside, can be a fall risk. So I think of cats. I have cats, and they like to rub around your legs. And if there are several cats that are rubbing around your legs, you could trip and fall and maybe fall into other items that you've accumulated, and that can lead to injury. So our next question for the chat is, how would you help a loved one who is engaging in hoarding? So just type your thoughts in the chat. And maybe you've tried some strategies already, and if you want to share some ones that have been helpful, or even ones that haven't been helpful, we'd certainly love to see that. So volunteer to keep them clean, get professional help and guidance, patience, empathy, be gentle, absolutely. Professional help, need a psychiatrist, dialogue, compassion, spend more time with them, encouragement. They're going by so fast, I'm not able to say each one. Go to support group. I had the most success reaching out to the VA. Offer to find a place for items in or out of the home. Help them organize and encourage them to get help. In my experience, it's cyclical. Be present with them. Mutually set a day and time to accomplish a specific goal. Clean one countertop. Small tasks first. Whatever they offer you, take it. Praise them for the good things they do. Listen to them as to what works and what doesn't. Go at their pace. Hear their problems. Should the county be alerted for safety biohazard reasons, or does that make things worse? I would say it depends on the situation. If there's an imminent danger, then it may be appropriate to get the county authorities involved. If there's not an imminent danger and the person is willing to discuss the issue, open to seeking counseling, then that may be the best first step. So I'll tell you another anecdote regarding my former upstairs neighbor. and this is about a strategy that we all used as neighbors to try and help my upstairs neighbor, because we were all concerned about her. And we had a yard sale at the apartment complex, and each of the apartments was welcome to contribute items to the yard sale. And we encouraged our neighbor who was suffering from compulsive hoarding to contribute some things to the yard sale, because she was in a situation where having a little bit of extra money from selling some items would have been helpful. And we talked to her, said, "Oh, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to put some things in the yard sale." And then as the date approached, she started backing up on that. Like, "Oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to do it. Oh, well, let me think about it." You know, there was commitment, and then there was kind of backpedaling. And the night before the yard sale, I went upstairs because I was in charge of the yard sale. And I said, "Why don't you just pick 3 things? 3 small things, big things, whatever it is, and just set them out in the hallway in the morning. You don't have to get up for the yard sale. I'll just put them out." I said, "Okay, I can do that. 3 things. I can do that." I got out the next morning and there was nothing sitting outside the door. So, we may have pushed her too hard. I may have pushed her too hard by saying 3 things, just 3 little things, and I had said, "Well, you'll get some money for these things, and that'll be helpful for you." And I'm a financial planning professor, so getting more money to help you, that to me, from where I was psychologically, that seemed to be more important than holding on to those things. But for where she was, it was more important for her to hold on to those things. So that strategy did not work. So I'll go ahead
Great.
and turn
Yes.
things back over to Sarah.
Thanks, Axton. So we're going to look at a few strategies here, and Axton and I are both educators. We are not clinicians or therapists. So we are sharing some basic strategies, and we'll be getting into some resources as well, so folks can seek out professional assistance as well. So as you can see here, the worst thing to do is to go into a hoarder's home and clean it up. And I saw in the comments that a lot of people indicated when the person is ready with their permission, because it can really just set the situation up to not be a good one. The hoarder most likely would just revert back to their old habits, or worse. Social supports really need to be in place to help a hoarder deal with the problem. So a few strategies here. The first is really to be patient. The situation did not happen overnight, and it's not going to be solved overnight. And so it takes time for the individual to learn new behaviors and strategies to cope with the hoarding disorder. Effective treatment, and in the readings that I did, can take up to a year, not to mention the long-term support needed to keep a hoarder from again falling back into those old habits. Living or working with someone who is chronically disorganized can definitely be a challenge. I really like the next one. Emphasize that the person is more important than the clutter. Let the person know that they are important to you, and they are more important than the clutter. Keep those the lines of communication open. Talking, communicating, not sneaking in when they happen to be at a doctor's appointment or somewhere to clean out, because we know that isn't going to happen. Coaching is definitely an important skill to have when working with people who are hoarders. Some coaching skills to possibly consider would be to listen without judgment. Right? I often say what's on my mind, and I would have to be very careful not to say, "Oh my gosh," and to go on a rampage, but to listen without judgment. To treat the person with respect and dignity. Treat them as you would like to be treated. Focus on the person's good qualities, not the mess. Find ways to draw out their best assets and to not focus on the faults. Recognize small steps of progress. I know in the chat someone said take the small steps. Maybe do the dishes, or maybe work with the person to clean off one counter. So small steps of progress would be great in eliminating the clutter. Help shape decisions, but don't make them. Right. So it's very important for the person to make their own decisions. We can encourage, we can nudge, we can refer, but ultimately folks make their own decisions. Now, there was a question in the chat about at what point do you get the county involved and perhaps get someone identified as a vulnerable adult who may need help making decisions. And if you get to that point, then we're talking about a different situation. Creating a support system is so very important. We talked early on about isolation, right? That was one of the risk factors. But having that support system for recovery or addressing the situation is so very important. There might be local groups or agencies, support groups that can help the individual and support them. And then again, seeking community resources is really important. Everybody, I think all of us want to be accepted by family and others in the community, whether we're hoarders or not. And there's definitely a stigma on people who hoard. So communities and family members really need to work together to create a support system for people who have hoarding tendencies. So where to go for help, right? We don't have any magical places to go, but these are the good places to start. So first, if you or a loved one has symptoms of hoarding, talk with your doctor or mental health professional as soon as possible. Some communities may have agencies that address hoarding problems, and most likely in larger communities as opposed to rural areas where they may not have as much. If there are concerns about health or safety, you may need to contact the local authorities, police, fire, public health, child or adult protection services, or animal welfare agencies. So definitely that is a step that can be taken if it gets to that point. So again, some potential resources. We mentioned doctors, mental health professionals, financial therapists are a group of helping professionals that you may not be aware of or not familiar with, but definitely in the mental health community, they would know of some financial therapists that could help with that. Again, police, fire department, public health, child, adult protection services, animal welfare agencies, support groups, again.
Hey, Sarah, can I jump in and just
course.
elaborate a little bit on financial
Yes.
therapists? So I am a member of the Financial Therapy Association and have been for several years. And financial therapists are individuals who either are trained in finance, so they could be certified financial planners, they could be accredited financial counselors like Sarah and I are, or they could be licensed mental health counselors. They could be marriage and family therapists. But regardless of the training, they take additional training to become financial therapists who are trained in both financial matters and mental health matters. So a financial therapist would be trained to address the mental health aspects of compulsive hoarding as well as the financial aspects of compulsive hoarding. If you are interested in learning more about financial therapy or you want to find a financial therapist, you can go to financialtherapyassociation.org, and we'll put this link in the email that goes out. But again, financialtherapyassociation.org. In the upper right of the homepage, there's a button that says Find a FT. FT, of course, being financial therapist. You can click on that, and then you can look for financial therapists by state. Some of them do take virtual clients as well.
Thank you, Axton. While you were talking, I was running through the chat here, and what a great conversation here. Melissa, you had shared that your mom is a severe hoarder, but her house is very clean and items organized. But in the basement and barn, there's only those hallways or walkways and lots of plastic tubs and different things. But she shared that in her family, they tried to convince or maybe nudge her to clear because of safety, such as expired food and medicine. And oftentimes, police departments, hospitals, clinics will take those expired medications. So that's a good place to get rid of those. And the food safety is really great. She said then they moved on to items that can still be useful for common goods, such as fabric scraps you said for making masks for COVID groups or quilting groups, that kind of thing. And that reminds me of the woman in the video. Really, they had intentions of using those items, but never got to the action. So thanks for sharing that. Archella shared that there's a declutter-a-thon. That's a new word for me this weekend for Clutters Anonymous. So definitely check that out. So some great chat. Kelly does ask about if the house is infested with pets, is it urgent to have the person move to another location, or do we just let him live that way because that's how he's been living? Or option 2 doesn't seem humane, right? So if it's a major safety issue, then you might want to be calling in some of those local professionals to help with the situation for sure. Continue the chat. We're going to do just a few more slides and we'll come back to that if we have time here. So prevention, because so little is known about hoarding disorders, there's really no known way to prevent it. However, as with many mental health conditions, getting treatment at the first signs or early on may help the situation from getting worse. So taking action early on can be helpful. So some resources that we found helpful, Mayo Clinic, hoarding disorder, and again, you'll be getting a copy of these slides and we'll be sharing the links in the follow-up email. So check out the Mayo Clinic. AARP has some good resources. The third bullet there is that facilitating financial health resource that Axton shared, and there's a little picture of it there. And then Kansas State Extension has a hoarding like lesson plan sort of thing that mirrors the Mayo Clinic resources as well. I'm going to cover what Axton shared early on. This was the third in a series of webinars. But I want to cover this and then we'll go back to the chat as time allows. We will be mailing a follow-up email again with a PDF of the PowerPoint slides and the links that have been shared. And in that will be a post-assessment. So yesterday you received a pre-assessment. That's just really helpful for us so we can report back to our funders and our universities. It is optional. You do not need to complete it. If you want to take a look at it, answer the questions you want to and not others, that is okay. If you need a certificate of participation, email me. This is a little different than our other webinars, but Rick, if you can throw my email in the chat, that would be great. Let me know if you need a certificate of participation. We will get that to you. If you are with the University of Minnesota and need well-being points, here is the link. And Rick, if you can throw that in the chat as well. We will include all of this in that follow-up email as well. So Axton, what are we seeing in the chat?
Well, if I muted myself. So really just resources that folks are sharing. So that's great. So we have a lot of professionals here from all over the country who work in the area of compulsive hoarding. And I'm seeing lots of mentions of resources from around the country. So if you're not paying attention to the chat, I encourage you to do so.
Yep, I'm just scrolling through here. Oh, yeah. Trying to see a name here. Star mentioned that she's a member of the Northeast Kingdom Bedbug and Hoarding Coalition, right? So bedbugs goes along with that, those healthy homes and pests and different things. Can you share the many resources? Definitely put a link in the chat, and folks can definitely check those things out. San Francisco has that mental health association. Can you share some of the slides on social media? Sure, I think so. Exton,
Yeah,
think
I'm
that's
okay
okay?
with that.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, we're okay with that. So definitely check out the resources, and if you're not aware of those, you could Google or again talk with your doctor, your mental health professional, or your local library. Libraries are so great at identifying resources. Public health would be able to help. Charisse, go Golden Gophers. Yes. And jackrabbits. SDSU has the jackrabbits as well. All right. So thank you, Rick, for putting the UMN link in there. If people need well-being points, info. Oh, thanks, Sophia. Information on the declutterathon. I will see if I can copy the chat, and I will share that in the follow-up email, because there are so many things flying by here, so that folks have a copy of that. Exit and I haven't had a chance to look at everything, so know that items are shared by other participants, and we haven't had time to vet them, but they're all looking like really great resources. Wow. I'm just scrolling to see if there's any extra questions. You are welcome, Melissa. Thank you for sharing the story about your mom. We will provide the chats, Tanya. I will work to do that. Yep, lots of great resources. Yep. Great. Yep, I do know how to save the chat. I was thinking about trying to remove names to just provide privacy for participants too. So that's what I was thinking. Rick can help me figure that one out. Well, thank you everyone for participating today. We are so pleased you were with us, and the response for this webinar has just been absolutely amazing. So we know that there are people who have concerns for themselves, family members, loved ones, and so we wish you well as you look for resources and take steps forward for action. Axton, any final comments?
Just one final comment to kind of bounce off of Sarah. For those of you who are struggling with compulsive hoarding, thank you for taking the time to join today's webinar, and thank you for reaching out and taking some of those first steps. We commend you for that.
Jennifer, I put back the slide of the other two webinars. We can definitely down the road a little bit, maybe share links to all of the recordings for that. Since everyone did register for these webinars, or one or more of these, we do have your name on a list now. And so we are planning, University of Minnesota Extension is planning future webinars. We'll let you know about those. And I'm hoping Axton and I will have an opportunity to work together again in the future. So yes, we will be sharing information, NOLA, about future webinars. Thank you, everyone.
Sarah, there was one question that sped through the chat, and that was any recommendations on finding a mental health provider, local county health departments?
Yeah.
Or...
How to help find a mental health provider or professional. most of us have a physician, just a general practitioner. If you're not familiar with mental health providers in your community, I would ask my local doctor. They can definitely help direct you. Local county public health department could help you as well. Axton, suggestions on that one?
I would also do some Google searching because hoarding is related to trauma in many cases. There are therapists who do specialize in trauma, so searching for a trauma therapist could be helpful as well.
Yeah, definitely. You're going to want to ask if they've got experience working with hoarders, for sure. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.